Kale lay on the cold, cracked ground of Varkos 3, his breath shallow and weak. The night sky above him was vast and empty, filled with distant stars that seemed too far away to offer any comfort. His body ached, his wings trembled, and his mind was clouded with pain. He had been left here to die. The Varkari Dominion had abandoned him, just as they had promised. They called him an abomination, a creature that should never have existed. Half human, half Varkari. He was neither one nor the other. His father had been a human explorer, his mother a noble Varkari, but their union was never accepted. The Dominion believed that bloodlines must remain pure, that only the strong should survive. And so, Kale was cast out, exiled to the wastelands where nothing survived for long. The air was dry and thin, making each breath difficult. His body, weakened from the days without food or water, struggled to move. His dark, leathery wings, which should have carried him through the skies, were torn and battered. He had tried to fly away when they left him, but his strength had given out too soon. Now he lay motionless, listening to the wind howl across the barren landscape. His mind drifted back to the moment of his exile. The Dominion warriors had led him to the edge of the great cliffs, their expressions cold and merciless. "You do not belong," the commander had said, his voice sharp as steel. "The Dominion has no place for creatures like you." Then, without another word, they turned and left. Kale had stood there, staring at their retreating figures, hoping, praying, that someone would turn back, that someone would see him as more than just a mistake. But no one did. The last sound he heard was the roar of their engines as they vanished into the sky, leaving him behind. A wave of bitterness rose inside him, but he forced it down. Anger would not help him now. He needed to survive. But how? He had no supplies, no allies, no way off this planet. His wings were too damaged to fly, and his legs barely had the strength to carry him. If he stayed here, he would die. He clenched his fists. No, he refused to let them win. Summoning the last of his strength, he pushed himself onto his hands and knees. The effort sent pain shooting through his body, but he ignored it. He needed to move. He needed to find shelter before the night grew even colder. With slow, unsteady steps, he forced himself forward. The ground beneath him was rough and uneven, littered with jagged rocks. Each step was a battle, but he did not stop. He could not stop. After what felt like hours, he saw something in the distance, dark shapes rising from the ground. At first, he thought they were just more rocks, but as he got closer, he realized they were ruins. Broken towers and crumbling walls stood against the night, their surfaces covered in strange markings. It was an ancient Varkari settlement, long abandoned. Hope flickered inside him. If there were ruins, there might be shelter. Maybe even something useful. Dragging himself forward, he entered the remains of what had once been a great hall. The roof had collapsed long ago, leaving only half-standing pillars and shattered stone. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was heavy, as if the place itself had forgotten what life felt like. Cal's legs gave out, and he fell to the ground, breathing heavily. His vision blurred, exhaustion pulling him toward unconsciousness. But just as he was about to close his eyes, something strange happened. A faint hum filled the air. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it was there. A glow flickered in the darkness, pulsing like a heartbeat. Cal's instincts sharpened. He forced himself up, scanning the ruins. Then he saw it, a small crystalline object embedded in the wall. The glow came from within, casting a faint blue light across the stone. It looked ancient, but somehow alive. He reached out, fingers trembling. The moment his skin touched the crystal, a surge of energy shot through him. His vision exploded with light, his mind filled with images, memories that were not his own. He saw warriors standing tall, their eyes burning with purpose. He saw battles fought in the skies, planets conquered, civilizations rising and falling. And then he saw himself, standing at the center of it all, wings spread wide, power radiating from his body. The vision vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving Cale gasping for air. His heart pounded in his chest. What had he just seen? Was it real? Or just a trick of his exhausted mind? But as he looked down at his hands, he realized something had changed. The weakness that had gripped him moments ago was fading. The pain in his body was still there, but it felt distant, like an echo rather than a weight. The crystal had done something to him. He didn't know what it meant yet, but one thing was clear: he was not the same as before. The Dominion had left him to die. They had made a mistake. Cale wasn't finished. Not yet. Cale sat against the broken wall of the ancient ruins, his breathing slow but steady. The glow from the strange crystal still pulsed softly beside him, casting flickering blue light across the cracked stone. His mind was racing. What had just happened? What was that vision? His body still ached, but something felt different, stronger. He flexed his fingers, and for the first time since being abandoned, he felt a spark of energy deep inside him. It wasn't much, but it was there, like a small flame refusing to die. The crystal. His gaze returned to it, still embedded in the wall, humming with a quiet, steady rhythm. Carefully, he reached out again, half expecting another surge of power. But this time, when his fingertips brushed its surface, nothing happened. No visions, no shock of energy, just the cool touch of ancient stone. Cale frowned. Had he imagined it? No, he knew what he had seen, what he had felt. That vision had been too real, too vivid to be just a dream. The warriors, the battles, the power surging through him, it meant something. But what? He pushed himself to his feet, wobbling slightly as his body adjusted. His wings still hung weakly behind him, torn and battered, but he felt lighter than before. His exhaustion had not completely vanished, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't sure how, but he could feel it in his bones. The ruins around him were silent, except for the wind whistling through the broken pillars. Whoever had once lived here was long gone, their legacy reduced to dust and forgotten symbols carved into stone. But the presence of the crystal meant that something had been left behind, something powerful. Cale moved carefully through the ruins, his sharp eyes scanning the walls for any signs of more clues. He traced his fingers over the strange markings, feeling the ancient history beneath his touch. These symbols were familiar, not in a way he could explain, but in a way that made sense deep in his mind. Then, in the far corner of the ruins, he spotted something else. A stone tablet, half buried under rubble. Its surface was covered in the same glowing blue script as the crystal. Cale's heart quickened. He knelt and brushed away the dirt, revealing more of the carvings. As he studied them, the symbols shifted before his eyes, rearranging into words he could understand. The forgotten shall rise. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't know who had written these words, but he felt as if they were meant for him. The forgotten. That was what the Dominion had called him when they cast him out. A mistake, a shadow, someone meant to disappear and be erased from history. But what if he wasn't? What if there were others like him? Cale clenched his fists, determination hardening inside him. If this place held secrets about the past, then maybe it also held the key to his future. But first, he needed to survive. His stomach growled, reminding him how weak he still was. Food, water, shelter. He needed all of them if he was going to make it through the night. He searched the ruins for anything useful, but most of what remained was broken beyond repair. The walls were cracked, the structures unstable. If a storm came, this place wouldn't be safe for long. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a narrow passage leading deeper into the ruins. Unlike the rest of the crumbling structures, this part looked untouched, hidden from time. Cale hesitated. It could be dangerous. But danger didn't matter. He had already been left to die. He had nothing to lose. He stepped forward, the faint blue glow from the crystal behind him fading as he moved deeper inside. The tunnel was dark and cold, the air thick with dust. His wings twitched instinctively, but the pain in them reminded him that flying was out of the question. He had to rely on his own 2 feet. As he walked, his ears picked up a sound, a faint dripping of water. Hope flared in his chest. Water meant life. He followed the sound, moving carefully over uneven ground. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he emerged into a small underground chamber. A natural spring bubbled from the rock, its clear water reflecting the dim light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Relief flooded through him. He dropped to his knees, cupping the water in his hands and drinking deeply. The cool liquid soothed his dry throat, filling him with a renewed sense of strength. As he drank, his eyes scanned the chamber. It was small, but safe. A shelter. He could rest here, recover, and plan his next move. Then something caught his attention. Another crystal, embedded in the far wall. This one was larger, its glow stronger. Kel's heart pounded. He could feel its energy even from here. Slowly, he reached out. The moment his fingers touched it, a wave of power rushed through him. His vision blurred, his mind filled with another flood of images. A planet in flames, a fleet of warships darkening the sky, a figure standing alone, wings spread wide, light shining from their body. And then, Kale himself, standing in that same light. The vision faded, leaving him gasping for air. His body tingled with the aftershock of whatever had just happened. He didn't understand everything yet, but one thing was clear. He was not just an abandoned outcast. He was something more. And the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. Kale sat in the underground chamber, his back against the cool stone wall. His mind was still spinning from the vision. The planet in flames. The fleet of warships. The figure bathed in light, and himself standing in the center of it all. What did it mean? His fingers tingled where he had touched the glowing crystal. The energy that had surged through him was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It wasn't just power. It was something deeper, something ancient. He looked at his hands. They still looked the same, calloused, worn from the hardships of survival. But he could feel it now, that spark inside him. The same one he had felt when he first touched the smaller crystal in the ruins above. Something inside him was waking up. Kale clenched his fists. If the Dominion had known about this power, would they still have left him to die? Or had they abandoned him because they feared what he could become? A part of him wanted to test his new strength, to see just how much had changed. But he was still weak, still hungry. He needed rest first. Leaning his head against the stone, he closed his eyes. The soft hum of the crystal in the wall was strangely soothing, like a heartbeat in the silence. Slowly, exhaustion took over, and for the first time since his exile, he allowed himself to sleep. When Kel woke, he felt different. His body no longer ached as much. The deep exhaustion that had clung to him for days had lifted. His limbs felt lighter, stronger. He stood up, stretching his wings carefully. The pain was still there, but duller now. The wounds on them were healing faster than they should have. He frowned. That wasn't normal. He flexed his fingers, then clenched them into fists. His grip felt stronger. His senses felt sharper. He could hear the faintest sound of water dripping from the rocks, feel the shift in air currents around him. It was like his body had been upgraded overnight. This is because of the crystal. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. The energy from the ruins hadn't just given him visions. It had changed him. He needed to know more. Kale turned back to the glowing crystal in the wall. It still pulsed with a steady rhythm, as if waiting for him. He hesitated, then reached out and placed his hand against it once more. The moment his skin touched the surface, another surge of energy rushed through him. But this time, it wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, flowing into him in waves instead of an overwhelming flood. His mind opened, and knowledge filled his thoughts. The Valkyrie were not always the rulers of this world. 1,000 years ago, Another race had lived here. They had built cities, carved symbols into stone, and harnessed the power of the crystals. They were warriors, not of brute force, but of intelligence and skill. But then, the Dominion came. The Valkyrie conquered them, wiped them from history, and claimed their power as their own. But they had never fully understood it. They feared what they could not control. That was why they hated hybrids like Kale. Because he was not just a mix of two species. He was the key to something greater. The vision faded, and Kale staggered back, breathing hard. His heart pounded in his chest. He understood now. The Dominion had always feared change. They had erased an entire race to keep their rule secure. And now, Kale was proof that their control was not absolute. He looked at his hands again, flexing them. The power was there, waiting to be used. For the first time, Kale didn't feel like an outcast. He felt like a warrior. He spent the next few hours testing his abilities. His speed had improved. He could move faster, his reflexes sharper. His strength had increased, allowing him to lift stones that should have been too heavy for him. Even his damaged wings, though still not fully healed, felt stronger than before. But the most shocking change was his senses. He could hear things beyond normal range, the distant rustling of creatures moving through the ruins above. He could feel the energy in the air, like an invisible current flowing around him. He was evolving. Kel's mind raced with possibilities. If he could grow stronger just from being near these crystals, what else could he become? How much power had the Dominion hidden from the galaxy? A surge of determination filled him. The Dominion had abandoned him, but he would not be forgotten. He would make them regret leaving him behind. Kale turned to the entrance of the tunnel. The ruins above held more secrets, and he intended to find them. He would learn everything he could about the crystals, about his abilities, about the truth the Dominion had tried to erase. And then he would show them just how wrong they had been. With one last glance at the glowing crystal, Kale stepped into the light of the surface. This was just the beginning. Kale emerged from the underground chamber, blinking as the harsh light of Varkos III's sun hit his eyes. The ruins stretched before him, silent and abandoned, but now they felt different. He had changed. His body was stronger, his mind clearer, and deep inside, something powerful stirred, something the Dominion had feared. The wind howled through the broken pillars, carrying the dry scent of dust and stone. Kale spread his wings lightly, testing them. The pain was still there, but the strength had returned. Soon, he would fly again. Soon, he would leave this forsaken place. But first, he needed answers. His gaze swept across the ruins, searching for more clues. The ancient civilization that once thrived here had left behind their knowledge, their power. The Dominion had tried to erase them, but their legacy lived on. And now, that knowledge was becoming part of him. Kale moved carefully through the broken structures, his footsteps light against the cracked stone. Every instinct in his body told him he was being watched. He paused, listening. The ruins were silent, too silent. Then he heard it. A faint shuffling sound. Kel's body tensed. He turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes scanning the area. A shadow moved behind a fallen pillar. Someone was here. His heart pounded. Was it a Dominion scout? Had they come to make sure he was dead? No. The movement was too uncertain, too hesitant. If it was a Dominion warrior, they would have attacked already. Kale crouched low, moving silently toward the shadow. His enhanced senses picked up a faint scent. Something unfamiliar, something not Valkyrie. He reached the pillar and waited. The shuffling sound grew louder. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Kale lunged forward. A startled cry rang out as his small figure tumbled backward, landing hard against the stone. Kale froze. It wasn't a warrior. It wasn't even an adult. It was a child. A young alien girl with wide, frightened eyes. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, her hair a dark cascade of braids that shimmered in the light. Her clothing was tattered, her small frame thin and frail. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Cale stared at her, shocked. He had expected an enemy. Instead, he had found a survivor. The girl scrambled back, her breathing fast and panicked. Her large eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Cale took a step back, raising his hand slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't move. He knelt down, keeping his voice calm. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Zeri." Her voice was barely audible, rough from thirst and exhaustion. Cale nodded. "I'm Cale." Silence stretched between them. The wind carried dust across the ruins, swirling between broken stone and lost history. Zeri's small hands clenched into fists. "You're different," she said, her voice uncertain. Cale's wings twitched slightly. He had heard those words before. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." Zeri studied him carefully, her fear slowly fading into curiosity. "Are you like them?" She gestured vaguely at the ruins around them. Cale wasn't sure how to answer. He wasn't fully Valkyrie. He wasn't fully human. And now, with the power of the crystals inside him, he wasn't even sure what he was becoming. "I don't know," he admitted. Zeri looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "Good," she muttered, "because they were bad." Cale's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Zeri's small face twisted with anger. "The Dominion." Cale's chest tightened. He knew the Dominion was ruthless, but hearing it from a child made it even worse. "They came here," Zeri continued, "a long time ago. My people hid. Some of us escaped. Some didn't." Her voice broke slightly, but she kept talking. "I was with my mother, but—" She looked away, blinking rapidly. Cale didn't need to hear the rest. He already knew. The Dominion had done to her people what they had tried to do to him. His fists clenched. This wasn't just about him anymore. "Are there others?" he asked. Zeri shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe. I've been hiding." She hesitated, then looked at him again. "You're not like them." Cale exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "I'm not." For the first time, Zeri's tense posture relaxed just a little. She wasn't completely sure she could trust him, but she wanted to. Cale stood up and glanced toward the horizon. The Dominion thought they had erased the past. They thought they had erased him. They were wrong. Cale had survived. Zeri had survived. And now, together, they would find out just how much of the past still remained. Because the forgotten were rising, and the Dominion would learn that some things cannot be erased. Cale and Zeri moved cautiously through the ruins, their footsteps quiet against the cracked stone. The wind had picked up, howling between the broken pillars like a whisper from the past. Zeri walked beside him, her small frame tense, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow. She had spent too long hiding, surviving alone. Trust did not come easily to her. Cale understood that. He had spent his entire life being treated as an outcast. But now he was no longer alone. The ruins stretched far beyond what Cale had first realized. What looked like scattered remnants of an ancient city were actually much bigger. An entire civilization buried beneath the sand. The deeper they went, the more intact the structures became. It was as if the heart of this place had been protected from time itself. Cale ran his fingers over the symbols carved into the walls. The same glowing script he had seen on the crystal. The same words that had whispered to him in visions. "The forgotten shall rise." He exhaled slowly. Whoever these people had been, they had left something behind. And the Dominion had feared it enough to try and bury it forever. Zeri tugged on his arm, pulling him toward a narrow passage between two towering stone slabs. "This way," she whispered. Cale hesitated. "How do you know?" "I used to hide here," she said simply. Cale followed her through the passage, ducking low as they slipped into the shadows. The air grew cooler, damp with the scent of old stone and something else. something metallic. Then he saw it. A door, massive and ancient, made of dark metal that had resisted the passage of time. Unlike the rest of the ruins, it was untouched by decay. Symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly in the dim light. Zeri glanced up at him. "I could never open it," she admitted. Kale stepped forward, pressing his palm against the metal. A strange warmth spread through his fingers, like the pulse of a heartbeat. The symbols flickered, then came to life. Zeri gasped as the door trembled, the ancient mechanisms grinding to life. With a deep, echoing groan, it began to slide open. Beyond it, a massive underground chamber was revealed. Kale and Zeri stepped inside cautiously. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with glowing crystals. But in the center stood something even more incredible, something that made Cal's breath catch in his throat. A ship, sleek and angular. Its hull was covered in the same glowing script as the ruins. It had been buried here, hidden for centuries, waiting. Kale took a step closer, his heart pounding. "This isn't just a ruin," he murmured. "This was a stronghold." Zeri stared up at the ship, her eyes wide. A stronghold for who? Kale didn't answer, because deep inside, he already knew. This was not just any ship. This was their ship, the ones who came before, the ones the Dominion had tried to erase. And now, it was waking up. A low hum filled the chamber. The crystals pulsed in response, their light growing brighter. Energy crackled in the air, making the hairs on Cal's arms stand on end. The ship was still alive. Zeri took a cautious step forward. "Kale," she whispered, "what if the Dominion comes back?" Cal's jaw tightened. "Then we don't run." Zeri looked up at him, uncertainty in her eyes. She had spent her whole life running, hiding from the Dominion's cruelty. But Kale wasn't like the others. He wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time in his life, he had a purpose. He turned back to the ship, determination hardening inside him. The Dominion thought they had won. They thought they had erased the past. They were wrong. The past was alive, and it was about to rise again. Kale stood before the ancient ship, his heart pounding in his chest. The soft hum of energy filled the air, growing stronger with every passing moment. The glowing crystals along the walls pulsed like a heartbeat, responding to the ship's awakening. Zeri took a hesitant step forward, staring up at the massive vessel. "It's alive," she whispered. Kale nodded. It was never dead, just waiting. For centuries, this ship had remained hidden beneath the ruins, untouched by time. The Dominion had tried to erase its existence, just like they had tried to erase him. But now, the past was rising. The ship's exterior shimmered as ancient symbols glowed across its hull. It was unlike anything Cal had ever seen before, sleek, powerful, and built with technology far beyond what the Dominion controlled. Kale placed his hand against the ship's surface. The moment his skin touched the cold metal, a surge of energy rushed through him. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was somewhere else, a battlefield. The sky burned with fire, and towering machines clashed against warriors clad in silver armor. Energy blasts streaked through the air as the battle raged on. At the heart of it all stood a single figure, tall, imposing, with wings like Cal's but larger, more powerful. The figure turned. Kale gasped. It was him. No, not him. But someone like him. Someone from the past. A voice echoed in his mind. "You are the last of our kind. The final spark of what we once were. But the fire can burn again." The vision shattered. Kale stumbled back, gasping for breath. His fingers tingled with energy, the sensation of the vision still fresh in his mind. Zeri rushed to his side. "Kale, are you okay?" He blinked, shaking his head. "I saw them. The ones who built this ship. They were warriors, and they fought against the Dominion." Zeri's eyes widened. Then they lost. Kale clenched his fists. No, they were betrayed. The Dominion hadn't won through strength alone. They had used deception, fear, and destruction to erase an entire species, but they had failed. Kale was proof of that. He turned back to the ship. The humming sound had grown louder, the lights along its surface flickering as if responding to him. I think I can activate it, Kale said. Zeri looked nervous. Are you sure that's a good idea? Kale smirked. No. He placed both hands against the ship. This time, the energy surged through him without resistance. Symbols flared to life across the vessel's hull, and a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. The ship was waking up. With a loud hiss, a ramp extended from its side, touching the stone floor, a path inside. Zeri took a step back. That's not normal. Kale exhaled slowly. Nothing about this is normal. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the ramp. The moment his foot touched the surface, a rush of warmth spread through him. The ship recognized him. Zeri hesitated, then followed. If we die, I'm blaming you. Kale grinned. Fair. Inside, the ship's interior was sleek and dark, illuminated by faint lines of blue light running along the walls. The air felt fresh, as if the ship had never been abandoned. Ahead of them, a central console flickered to life. Strange symbols scrolled across the display, and then, a voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Welcome, descendant. Kale froze. Zeri's mouth dropped open. Okay, that's definitely not normal. The voice continued. The Dominion has taken much from us, but the fire still burns. And now, it is time for you to reclaim what was lost. Kale felt a shiver run down his spine. The past wasn't just a memory, it was alive. And it had been waiting for him. Zeri grabbed his arm. Kale, I think we just started something really, really big. Kale nodded. The Dominion had abandoned him. Now, they were about to learn the cost of their mistake, because he wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was the beginning of something new. Kale stood in the center of the ancient ship, his heart pounding as the glowing blue symbols flickered around him. The voice had spoken, calling him descendant, telling him that the fire of the past still burned. Zeri stood close beside him, her small hands clenched into fists. What does this mean? She whispered. Kale took a deep breath. It means, I am not the last. For so long, he had believed he was alone, the only one of his kind, an outcast, abandoned to die. But the ship's voice told a different story. The forgotten were not truly gone. Their legacy still remained, and he was a part of it. The ship's lights brightened, as if responding to his thoughts. A large circular console rose from the floor, pulsing with energy. Strange symbols ran across its surface, but this time, Kale understood them. Zeri gasped as he stepped forward. You can read it. Kale nodded slowly. It's not just reading. It's like the words are in my mind. He reached out, pressing his palm against the console. A surge of power rushed through him. The ship trembled. The deep hum of its engines roared to life. Dust and debris shook loose from the walls, swirling in the air. Zeri took a step back, her eyes wide. Kale, what are you doing? Kale didn't know exactly. He only knew that it felt right. The ship's systems awakened fully, and suddenly, a massive holographic display projected in front of them. It showed a map, not of the ruins, but of the entire planet, and it was marked with symbols. Cal's chest tightened as he studied them. These were not just random locations. They were hidden sites, strongholds, just like this one. The Dominion had tried to erase the past, but the past had survived. Zeri stepped closer, staring at the glowing map. There are more. Kale clenched his fists. Yes, and we're going to find them. The ship's voice spoke again. The fire was never truly extinguished, it only waited. And now, it is time to rise again. Kale felt a deep resolve settle in his chest. For years, the Dominion had ruled unchecked, crushing those who resisted. They had abandoned him, thinking he was weak, thinking he would never return. They were wrong. Zeri looked up at him, determination in her young eyes. So what do we do now? Kale turned toward the ship's controls, his wings twitching with anticipation. We stop running, he said. We find the others. And we fight back. The ship responded, its engines flaring to full power. The time of hiding was over. The Forgotten had awakened, and the Dominion was about to learn that some things can never be erased.